Hi there, everybody. Adam Cleary from FourFourTwo here, and after just, 90 plus days of him, possibly, or him, maybe, or will somebody please come and manage my football club? It's Big Ange. Tottenham have got Big Ange, and that's pretty good. Now, if you are a subscriber to this channel, if not, just the buttons there, you will never regret it a single day in your life. Last week, we did a video on why Tottenham seemingly were having some problems in appointing a new manager. Now, think about that video, and admittedly, you will just have to take my word for it, as I did originally include a bit about Ange Postecoglou and how he might actually be a good solution to this problem, but I thought, nah, do you know what? I'll leave that for now. I'll do it as a follow-up next week before they actually announce him, and well, now they've actually announced him. And it was going to be about how his managerial style and his tactical philosophy might make him the right person to fix all of Tottenham's problems. So right, so first of all, going to tell you a little bit about Postecoglou the man, and then after that, we'll look a little bit at his tactics and his philosophy, because it kind of feels like both of these things are equally important to this appointment. Alright, please join me in the time machine as we take a journey all the way through space and history, and we arrive here in the year 2000. Say You'll Be Mine by Steps is currently #1 in the charts. You are definitely already bored of the Furby you begged your parents for Christmas, and over in Rio de Janeiro, for reasons known only to them, Manchester United are competing in that Club World Cup thing. Final game of the tournament is against the Australian representatives and the Oceania Club champions, South Melbourne. It's an otherwise unremarkable game. Quinton Fortune scores twice, and as was customary back then, David Beckham was, for some reason, photographed with his shirt off. But in the opposition dugout in that game, and by dugout I mean literally just this row of garden chairs, Alex Ferguson's opposite number was a one Angelos Postecoglou. I mean, at 34 years old at the time, Postecoglou was at the very beginning of what was going to be one of the most fascinating careers in football management. He immediately ended South Melbourne's 7-year wait for a domestic championship with back-to-back titles in 1998 and 1999, followed up by winning the Oceania Club Championship that same year. Now, while still very much at the peak of his popularity in this job, he then left it to take over managing the Australian youth teams, but that didn't work out because he personally saw his job there as creating pathways for these young players to get into the Australian national team, basically developing them in a national setup so they'd be better players in the long run. But the governing body saw his job as qualifying for all the youth tournaments. And thus, when they didn't then qualify for the Under-20s World Cup, this led to a massive televised argument between himself and pundit Craig Foster, where he responded to the criticisms of the team's failure by basically listing all the systemic problems the country was having with developing players.
You're paid
Why
to
do you keep saying
qualify
you're pointing to the players? You're obviously not listening to me, mate. So if you're going to keep on, look, and to be honest, what's the point of this interview? What's the point of this interview?
He felt this made his position within Australian football untenable, which of course it did, but it also made him low-key quite popular with just Australian football fans at large. And thus, after a few years in the wilderness of like the Greek lower leagues amongst other places, he started doing some punditry work in Australia, and this, combined with his overall popularity, got him the Brisbane Roar job. He came in, immediately got rid of half the squad, including some of the most experienced and popular players. Ooh, look, there's Craig Moore, you might remember him, and the critics hit the roof about it. Postecoglou responded by simply saying, look, judge me in a year's time, and in a year's time, they were easily the most exciting team to watch in all of Australia. But in 2 years' time, they were A-League champions, lost 1 game all season, and went on a 36-match unbeaten run. And in 3 years' time, they became the first team to win back-to-back A-League championships. Postecoglou was already now the most successful manager in Australian football history, and everybody simply called them Rawsalona, which I think does sound a lot better in an Australian accent, but I promised myself I wasn't going to do any in this video, so you'll have to do that yourself. After this, he was poached by Melbourne Victory, where, you guessed it, he got rid of half the first team, including some of the most experienced and popular players, including Harry Kewell, ooh, maybe you remember him, and told everybody to judge him in a year's time. Now, he might not have ended up winning anything at Melbourne, that's because he was only there for 1 year before he was poached by the Australian national team to just fix the Australian national team. Now, this is where it gets particularly interesting, because after he'd had that massive ideological disagreement about how the youth team should be run, they turned to him because the Australian Football Federation felt that they were too reliant on the golden generation of 2006. Your Vidukas, your Kewells, your Emmertons, your Schwartzes, etc. They wanted someone to come in and not be afraid of getting rid of the old guard and building a new, exciting, sustainable team from the ground up, which had lots of pathways from the youth setup into the full team. And that's exactly what he did. They qualified for the 24 2014 World Cup, and out of the players who actually played in that tournament, only Tim Cahill and Mark Bresciano were over the age of 30. Their opening game featured Matthew Ryan, Jason Davidson, Matthew Leckie, Ben Holleran, Tommy Orr, all players 23 years of age or younger. Now, and what's really interesting here, and you're going to need to remember me saying this, is that they lost every single game at that World Cup. They went straight out of the group stages with 0 points. And yet the general consensus on Australia's performance in that tournament from both Australian fans and everyone else was that actually they looked really, really good. They got drawn with the Netherlands, Spain and Chile, and Australia didn't look out of their depth in any single game. They were pushing for an equaliser against Chile right up until the 92nd minute and put 2 goals past the Netherlands side that successfully kept clean sheets against both Brazil and Argentina. And yeah, okay, they did get beat 3-0 off Spain, but by that point they were already out, and they used the opportunity to, anybody, just blood another load of young players. I'm just going to stop with the history lesson there because he leaves Australia after getting them into the next World Cup, and he does go to Japan for a little while, but I just want to jump to this season with Celtic. And the reason I'm doing that is because while he is absolutely dominated in Scotland, and we will talk about some of the numbers in a bit because they're absolutely crazy, it was his performance in the Champions League this season where Celtic did not win a single game and went out in the group stage that I think is quite interesting. And they were drawn in a group with Real Madrid, RB Leipzig and Shakhtar Donetsk. And let's just put the Ukrainians to one side. They got a home draw and an away draw against them, but they lost all 4 other games. Now Madrid won 3-0, yes, but that doesn't really tell the whole story. Like, they only created 2 more chances than Celtic over the entire game, and it was the lowest possession they posted in the entire group stage. And even away at the Bernabeu, like, they got beat 5-1, which looks terrible, but they had 8 shots on target against Madrid, which is a joint high in the Champions League this season, along with that game when Man City beat them 4-0. Same with the Leipzig games as well. Like, yes, they were 2 defeats, but they were 2 performances that were really, really good. Like, bottom line, when he's got the resources to be competitive, he dominates. But when he doesn't have the resources, he is at least still competitive. And if I was a Spurs fan, I'd be pretty excited about that. But the big question, of course, is how will Tottenham play under him? Alright, so if you've seen Celtic this season, you will know they play in this sort of 4-3-3 shape, but there is something wrong with this image currently, and that is that most of them are in the wrong half of the pitch. Ta-da! Celtic, in reality, actually play more like this. It is not uncommon to see them in most games this season with their back line, not even just on the halfway line, but fully into the opposition's defensive third. And when I say they dominate teams in that league, I mean they absolutely dominate teams in that league. They've got 73% average possession across the entire season. Like, nearly 3/4 of the entire season when Celtic were involved, they just had the ball. That's insane. And I know a few of you will be like, oh, it's just Scotland, who cares? But like, that is genuinely, even by the standards of Celtic and Rangers dominating that league, that is levels and levels above that. Ange Postecoglou's tactics with Celtic is to literally put a pillow over the face of the opposition and hold it there until their legs stop kicking. And they do that by a combination of having so many players available in attacking areas, but also really clever movement that creates loads of space and stops it getting congested. Like, the wingers or wide attackers in this Celtic team stay as high as they possibly can in this system to stop the opposition defence from being too compact. The idea being that the space this then creates allows either of the 8 to get alongside the centre forward to effectively function as another centre forward. This requires both the centre backs to push up alongside the defensive midfielder to create a little triangle in the middle so you can recirculate possession, you can keep it, you can move it around. They basically do the job of midfielders. But what's really interesting about the system is how the fullbacks work both in an attacking sense and a defensive sense, because you, a quite normal, insane person, are probably looking at this thinking, so your centre midfielders play as strikers and your centre backs play as midfielders. This is insane. Surely the second you lose the ball, you will concede a goal. How is Celtic not conceding 5 goals a game? Well, we all know what a counter press is, right? Celtic don't have a counter press. What they do is have fullbacks that are constantly looking for a counter press. They never, ever, ever go on the outside. They play in this space here. They are both effectively what's known as inverted fullbacks, which means instead of looking to get down the line and provide width, they look to move into the middle of the pitch and play there instead. And while it looks like this in the attacking phase, they are just as happy doing it in the build-up phase, or even when they're defending, they will spend a lot of the time in the middle of the pitch. Now, this is really important because it enables you to do 2 things. First off, it's actually quite difficult to score from crosses in Scotland because most centre-backs in that league are big, strapping lads, called Angus, with heads made of granite, who would get rid of their own mother were she floated into the 6-yard box. So this provides Celtic with better options for crosses. Think about it, you've got your attackers nice and wide. If they want to put a ball into the box for either of these lads to get on the end of, it's quite far to travel. It's got to go up into the air, it's got to hang, you know what I mean? It gives a defender a much better run at the ball from which to clear it. So if instead you can get a fullback in one of these areas, what's known as the half space, they can put in much better crosses. They haven't got to hang them in the air, they haven't got to float them over, they can sort of drill them along the ground, or they can go directly at head height. They can do the kind of crosses that defenders hate trying to defend. But their most important job is not this. The most important job is how they defend, because Celtic do lose the ball. They put in other crosses, they create chances which burn out, and because they're so high up, there's loads of space for teams to attack into. The fullback's main job is to stop that. With the central players all this narrow makes it very difficult to sort of play through the middle, but the wide attackers being that wide means there's loads of space in the channels, and it's here that the fullbacks have to be alert. Now what you probably think is quite sensible to do is for the fullbacks then to sort of drop back and deny them that space in behind, but instead their job is to be as aggressive as possible when the balls go into these areas to try and force a turnover themselves. And this is how they've got such high possession statistics this season, not because they just keep the ball for the sake of it and knock it around in this semicircle, but because they win it back so quickly in these areas after they lose it. Now again, do I think Spurs are going to play exactly like this? Absolutely not. If Tottenham, with their current team, try to do this in the Premier League, they would concede about, do the maths, 16 goals a game. But the fundamental principle of keeping your width, creating space, being intense, wanting to be on top, wanting to play on the front foot is something that Postecoglou has consistently done, no matter whether he's the best team in the league, like Celtic in the SPL, or the worst team in the league, like Celtic in the Champions League group stage. But yes, Tottenham Hotspur fans, the long wait is over, so please let me know how excited you are, or otherwise, in the comments below. And of course, if you haven't already, please do subscribe to FourFourTwo on YouTube. It's the best football YouTube channel in the world. And if you want to call me a big dope who doesn't know what he's talking about, you can get me on Twitter at Adam Cleary, C-L-E-R-Y, and the entire 442 social spectrum is available at 442. In the meantime though, thank you very much for watching. Well done to me for not doing a single Australian accent in this entire video. Personal growth, and I'll see you soon. Goodbye!